David, you should be able to begin.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Lawrence. I'm the chair of the Conference for Food Protection. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 biennial meeting of the Conference for Food Protection following delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The executive staff, executive board, program and sponsor committees, and Conference Direct, our virtual platform provider, have been working diligently to make this all virtual meeting as engaging and productive as we can for retail food safety stakeholders from across the country to work and learn collaboratively. The agenda for this biennial meeting, as you know, was modified to accommodate the virtual platform. This included holding our pre-biennial meeting workshop in April 2021 as a separate event. And again, I extend my thanks to everyone involved in making the workshop a great success. As this is our first time the biennial meeting has been held as a virtual event, I hope you will find that every effort, including holding training and orientation sessions, has been made to ensure the integrity of the CFP process in the virtual setting. Please join me in recognizing the work accomplished by conference members whose countless hours serving on committees will make this meeting a huge success. The ongoing commitment and voluntary participation of all of you is crucial for the continuing success and relevance of the conference. I encourage you all to interact, participate, and engage. If you are a first-time attendee, be ready to experience the CFP process, where recommendations to address current food safety topics and concerns were submitted as issues to be discussed and debated by various stakeholders in the consensus building process of our councils, and then ultimately voted on by the Assembly of State Delegates. We extend our sincere thank you to our sustaining sponsors and donors for their generous support that helps make it possible for CFP to carry out the important work that takes place during and between biennial meetings. The following sustaining sponsors provided support at the titanium level: the Association of Food and Drug Officials, ChemStar Sterilox, Darden Restaurants, Diversey, Ecolab, FMI, the Food Industry Association, Matrix Sciences, the National Environmental Health Association, the National Registry of Food Safety Professionals, the National Restaurant Association, ServSafe, NSF International, Procter & Gamble Professional, Publix Supermarkets Incorporated, State Food Safety, Yum Brands Incorporated. Next are our gold level sustaining sponsors: Amazon, the Association of Food and Drug Officials of Southern States, also known as AFDOS, Compass Group, Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association, Giant Eagle Incorporated, Gojo Industries, Harris Teeter, the International Association of Food Protection, Meyer Inc., the National Automatic Merchandising Association, Prometric, Restaurant Depot, Sheetz Incorporated, Sodexo, Testo North America, and Wegmans. At the silver level, or our sustaining sponsors are Chick-fil-A, the City of Aspen, CKE Restaurants Incorporated, In-N-Out Burger, King Soopers, Rimco Products, Restaurant Brands International, Southeastern Grocers, Steritech, Underwriters Laboratories, Wakefern Food Corporation, and Wawa. Our bronze level sustaining sponsors are the Colorado Environmental Health Association, Hazel Analytics, Pasture Training Incorporated, and Whole Foods. I would also like to recognize and thank our two service donors. Ecolab made a donation to help cover the cost of the Pathable platform we are presently using for this meeting. Testo North America made a donation to help cover the cost of the mobile app Attendify for this meeting. And of course, thank you to Barbara Gersenich for sustaining donor support she provided in memory of her husband, John K. Fudala, a former CFP executive board member. You will find a complete listing of sponsors and donors and links to their websites in Pathable under the Sponsors tab in the program book. You also find them scrolling on the homepage in Pathable. There's a banner that scrolls across the bottom of that page with the sponsor information. I would like to share with you information about a donation that CFP made to We Don't Waste, an innovative food recovery for hunger in Denver, Colorado. Troy Huffman, the Denver LAC local arrangements committee co-chair, reported having a wonderful morning getting to see the We Don't Waste facility in Denver metro area and hear about some of the amazing things that were going on for the Denver community. They were very appreciative of the check that the Conference for Food Protection provided to them, and then that they gave some very good information about the projects that the funds would help with. Troy thanks the CFP for providing this support to one of their wonderful community partners in Denver. Pictured on the screen are left to right, Kyle Enders, the Director of Development, Troy Huffman, and then Arlen Preblet, Founder and Executive Treasurer for the We Don't Waste facility. We have to thank, of course, the Denver Local Arrangements Committee for the time and effort they invested in planning for the 2025 biennial meeting, and express our regrets that the in-person meeting had to be canceled due to the COVID-19 restrictions. This is our 50th year anniversary of the conference's inaugural meeting held in Denver, Colorado. So it was disappointing that we could not have the in-person meeting there. Our sincere gratitude to the Denver Local Arrangements Committee that was co-chaired by Troy Huffman with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and Rebecca Wind with Darden Restaurants. You will find a complete listing of the Denver LAC members on page 40 of the program book. And that can be found on Pathable under the program book navigation tab. Now I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Richard Linton, who will be the moderator of the keynote portion of the session. And Rich will take it from here. Thank you all, and please have a very successful meeting. I appreciate your time with us.
Well, thank you, David, and good morning, everybody, and happy birthday, happy anniversary, 50 years with the Conference for Food Protection. That seems like a long, long time until I find that I'm a few years older than 50 years old. So anyways, happy birthday, CFP, and welcome to the opening session. The opening session, the title today is Recipe for Food Safety Success, Collaboration, Partnership. Okay, and it looks like it also took my screen off. Is that correct?
You're back on now and we can hear you.
Okay, but can you see the screen?
We just see you.
Okay, now you can see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just kicked off of Zoom. So just not knowing what you heard, just quickly going back to the agenda. We have two keynote speakers, each giving a 25-minute presentation, followed by two respondents, also each having 10 minutes apiece, followed by 10 minutes of questions. For the questions, in order for me to be able to manage this in the best way possible, questions can be asked at any point in time during the program, but we're going to answer them in the last 10 minutes, from 10 minutes of until 12 noon. Please ask questions through the chat function in Zoom. And when you ask the question, to help me direct that question, please identify who you are, who you're directing your question to, and then your question. So again, thank you for your participation. We'll now get going in just a couple of minutes. So our first presenter is Frank Yanis, who's the Deputy Director for Food Policy and Response at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He is a Principal Advisor to the FDA Commissioner on food safety policies, including implementation of the FDA Food Modernization Act. His leadership role covers a broad spectrum such as outbreak response, traceback investigations, product recall activities, and supply chain innovation. Mr. Yanis came to FDA from leadership roles with Walmart and the Walt Disney Company. He has long been recognized for his role in elevating food safety standards and building food safety management systems based on science and risk. Good morning, Frank, and welcome.
Hey, good morning, Richard. It's good to be with you. If you could just one click, please. Well, good morning. I'm delighted to be with the Conference for Food Protection again. I wish it could have been in person, but we'll make the best of it virtually. I think many of you know I have a long history with CFP, having served on Council 1 Rules and Regulations for many, many years. I also had the privilege and honor of serving as chair and co-chair of that council. And as you heard from Rich, I spent first part of my career, 20 years at the Disney Company. So I like to joke I was at the happiest place on earth. I then went to Walmart, the busiest place on earth for about 10 years. And now I'm at the FDA, and that's I'll let you fill in the blank. But I actually call it one of the most prestigious regulatory agencies on earth. And it's a real pleasure and honor to serve the American people in this fashion. Next slide, please. You know, we just experienced what I think has been one of the biggest tests on the global food system. And before we jump into today's topic of how do we bend the curve of foodborne illness once and for all, leveraging these key factors for success, such as collaboration and leadership, I did want to pause to just thank each and every one of you. Like I said, I think we've experienced, without question, one of the biggest tests on the US food system in the past 100 years. And the reality is, while there have been some challenges, we all know we experienced some supply chain disruptions. We learned very quickly that worker safety and health in food sustainability are two sides of the same coin. The reality is, I don't think we would have gotten through this crisis without the work that each and every one of you have done. So on behalf of FDA, I want to sincerely thank you for showing up to work every day as part of the essential work sector for the nation. And because of you, I think consumers had access to safe and available food throughout the pandemic. So thank you very much. Next slide, please, Rich. I wanted to start off with this premise before we dove in and you start deliberating over the course of the next day or two. Thinking about the pandemic and just thinking about life in general, I don't have to spend a lot of time persuading you that the world is changing very rapidly. It's changing more rapidly than I think any of us ever imagined. The reality is things are changing so fast that I heard this quote that I wanted to share with you that I thought was pretty relevant to today's conversation. And the quote read like this: "The pace of change has never been this fast, and it will never be this slow again." Now, if I were in front of a group of audience, I suspect many of you would be nodding. Things are changing so rapidly. We're seeing things that we never thought we would see in our lifetime. The pandemic is accelerating some of this change. And this is true for food and food safety as well. Next slide, please. In fact, I often say I believe we're in the midst of a food revolution. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that, having worked in the food system for about 30 years. The reality is we see new foods being developed, cell-cultured foods, gene-edited crops. We see new food production technologies coming to life. We see foods being reformulated as we speak. We see the food system becoming increasingly digitized. We see the food system increasingly becoming global. And so at FDA, we believe that this rapid rate of change in these modern times are going to require more modern approaches. And that's going to be the call to action today, is continued change to make progress in food safety. The reality is, without change, we cannot advance food safety. Now, I was challenged to talk a little bit about these ingredients of leadership, collaboration, partnerships, and participation. And in fact, this word cloud had been developed years ago, but if you look at the bottom of the word cloud itself, you can think of this word cloud as a recipe. What are the critical ingredients? And you can see leadership and collaboration. So we are completely aligned with CFP on these principles of leadership and collaboration being critical for this new era of smarter food safety. I've often said that smarter food safety is first and foremost people-led and people-focused. The name implies technology, and of course, it's going to be increasingly technology-enabled, just like so many sectors of life around us, but it has to rely on people. And the critical factors for success that CFP has asked us to talk about, I think you're going to be seeing sprinkled throughout my conversation today about the new era. So let me talk a little bit about them before we get into more detail. Leadership. Why do I think that's so important? Throughout my entire career, I've heard so many people talk and write about food safety management. And the reality, I did this search earlier in my career. I went back and looked at, hey, how often does food safety management show up on Google searches versus food safety leadership? And it's almost all about food safety management. Food safety management systems are critical. But the reality is that food safety management and food safety leadership are different. The traditional definition is managers or management works in the system, leaders work on the system. And I believe to make progress in bending the curve of foodborne illness, we need more food safety leadership. Willing to get a little bit out of your comfort zone and look at the system as a whole and say, how do we influence or change it for better? Collaboration is critical. And they've asked me to talk about that. I think we all have heard the phrase, food safety requires collaboration. The reality is we have a very large and decentralized and distributed food system. It's pretty amazing. The number of farms, the number of food processing facilities in this country and abroad, the number of retail establishments and how they're changing. And the reality for food and food safety to work, there are a lot of interdependencies, and it requires collaboration. It requires going further than collaboration to advance food safety. In particular, it requires partnerships, collaborating to work together, and we should collaborate in a manner that adds value to all participants. But partnerships to me says something a little different. It means that we're not only just collaborating, we're in this together to win. And then participation, I like to think as food safety as a contact sport. And the reality, this is why I'm in Washington, D.C. and at FDA, is you have to participate. You have to get in. It's easy to be critical. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, I don't like the regulations. I don't like that we're making progress against the battle of foodborne disease. And the only way to make a difference is to participate. And so that's what the new era of smarter food safety is about. And it encompasses all of the ingredients that CFP is talking about that are needed for critical success. If you can go to the next slide, Rich. What I'm going to try to do in the time we have remaining is I'm going to try to give you a real brief overview of some of the key components of the new era. You've probably already heard we've published a blueprint. We published it last year, despite the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic. The pandemic has affected us, but it hasn't derailed what we want to do. And in fact, if anything, it's strengthened our resolve. And this idea that we had the right things in mind before the pandemic hit. And as we worked through the pandemic, the reality is a lot of the ideas in the blueprint have been further reinforced and strengthened. I'm going to go through them quickly. Tech-enabled traceability. We're going to talk a little bit about smarter tools and approaches to prevention. The idea that we can add new tools to our toolbox as food safety professionals. This wasn't done for CFP, but it's just part of the FDA's plan. Really focusing on new business models and the way the food system is changing and retail modernization. Some people say, Frank, FDA got very focused on food manufacturing and farms over the past decade with the Food Safety Modernization Act. And they felt like maybe we were not as focused on retail, but you're going to hear we're dead focused on retail, and we will be for the next 10 years. And then we're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, food safety culture. You can go to the next slide, please. So let's start with food traceability or tech-enabled traceability. This is a bridge between what I call FSMA and the new era, the need for us to better track and trace foods. Our first step in this work was the proposed food traceability rule, which I hope many of you have already reviewed. We have a proposed food traceability rule. And what's unique and different about the approach we're taking, when we've talked about food traceability in years past, we've often talked about one step up, one step back traceability. That is somewhat meaningless, in the 21st century, where we increasingly can digitize food establishments and foods as assets. And so what the agency has done is published a list of what we call critical tracking events. What are the data elements that are needed to create a universal language of food traceability? The other thing we've done is we've published a list of proposed foods that would require this additional record keeping. We're on track to complete this rule by next year. Right now, there's a proposed rule. We've received a lot of comments. We held 3 public meetings. We believe that the future is probably food traceability, increasingly technology enabled. So we are just wrapping up, and you should hear more from us soon. Food traceability challenge that we've called the low to no tech traceability challenge, that is really looking at the fact that we know you can digitize these records, but how can we do it in a lower non-cost way to allow it to scale to small and medium enterprises? So expect to hear more from us. This is important for retail because right now, one of the missing links has often been in foodborne outbreak investigations, the connection between what the consumer actually ate, that's a case definition, where did they purchase it, and how do you trace that back to source? You know, it's that first and last mile that are really, really the challenging points. And increasingly, it's been that last mile. So right now in the proposed food traceability rule, we are proposing that we be able to keep records through retail, and retail defined broadly to include restaurants and grocery stores. So more on food traceability. It's really important. Sometimes people say, Giannis, why so focused on food traceability? It's reactive, it's not preventative. And I say, oh no, food traceability is a game changer for food safety. If you look at the fact that we can couple whole genome sequencing with real-time food traceability, we can get back to source quickly, we can shorten epidemic curves, we can do better root cause analysis to prevent these recurring types of outbreaks. And we just create a new level of transparency, which is good for prevention. So it will be a game changer for prevention, trust me. Next slide, please. And that's leadership, isn't it? Working on the system, that the current system of food traceability, think about it. In 2006, we had a spinach outbreak. It took FDA 2 weeks to trace back to source. For that 2 weeks, we had pulled spinach nationwide, and we find ourselves almost 20 years later in the same place. So we need food leadership. A second thing that we're working on under smarter tools and approaches to prevention, I could give you a lot of new tools that we're adding. One is technologies such as artificial intelligence. And let me be clear, whenever you hear me talk about new technologies, whether it's AI or distributed ledger technology, I always like to emphasize it's not about the technology. Don't think that FDA is chasing any shiny coins. We're not. It's the idea that we can add these new tools to our toolbox and solve some of the public health challenges that we thought we could never solve, but we're increasingly seeing an ability to do so. And so this slide is intended to depict how we've already conducted a proof of concept, and we're in pilot phase, literally, at ports all across the country, where we're seeing the role of AI or machine learning overlaid onto the way we do import screening right now, to see if AI could increase our predictive capabilities of finding which container here has violative products. Our proof of concept started with seafood, as 94% of all seafood consumed by Americans are imported from abroad. The reality is overall only about 50% of our food is imported, but seafood's pretty high. And our proof of concept suggested that the power of machine learning might dramatically increase our ability to point our investigators into which shipments of food, which containers, and which foods they should focus on. And so that's an example of new tools. You can go to the next slide. And that's leadership as well. Another thing that we want to work on is inspection modernization. You know, the 20th century was called the industrial age. The 21st century is being called the digital age, and everything is based on data. And I believe that food safety starts and ends with better data. And we now are entering an era where we can digitize information, no longer have food safety data on a piece of paper that's a dead end, and increasingly analyze that data, convert it to preventative information, and automate business processes. So one of the things we announced recently in this report that you see on the screen is our desire to go back and look at how do we further modernize our inspectional approaches using these emerging technologies that I talk about and using better data-driven predictive analytics. We can better identify that we regulate, the establishments that we regulate. We can better conduct risk prioritization, more granular from just high risk to non-high risk. And we could move from maybe a frequency-based to a risk-based inspection system. This is true for all of us. And these are the types of tools that I think all of us, and I suspect many of your jurisdictions are already working on this. But we will do this work. We're starting in earnest as we speak, and we will invite everyone to the table, both the private, public, and consumer groups, to talk about how can we oversee modernization of our inspection program. The example that I like to use is if you have a fairly new vehicle, think about oil changes. It used to be that you told you got to change your oil every 3,000 miles or every 3 months. The reality is now, based on data and analytics, you get a notice saying it's time to change your oil. Wouldn't it be great? And I don't think this is blue sky. I think this is possible. Wouldn't it be great that if we got signals or messages that said it's time to inspect this facility because we think there's less control there, and this is the right time to be present. Next slide, please. Mutual reliance is another area of the New Era Smarter Food Safety Blueprint. We've talked about the importance of collaboration and partnerships. This, I think, includes both of those key concepts. But it's really important that we create an integrated national food safety system for the US. We've been working on this with CFP and others for a long time now. But states play a critical role. I've seen this firsthand. The reality, when I was in the private sector working for the world's largest retailer, I knew this was the case because I often found myself working with state and local regulators more often than federal regulators. And having been now at FDA for nearly approaching 3 years, I find that's the case. Some of the outbreak investigations, the boots on the ground at the local level are critical. And so under the core element of smarter tools and approaches for prevention, we're going to advance our work together under what we call domestic mutual reliance. We want to create comparable regulatory systems to be used with our state partners and treat them as co and equal partners in this national food safety net. We're going to collaborate on training as we've done in the past. We're going to collaborate on harmonizing laboratory methodologies. And this April, I'm pleased to announce that we signed our first domestic mutual reliance partnership agreement with Utah Department of Ag and Food. And so if you're on the line, thank you. This agreement is going to further expand the work that we do in protecting public health as an integrated food safety system. And our goal this year is to have additional agreements signed with at least 3 other states. And we'll continue this longer term strategy to fully realize this integrated food safety system that we've been talking about. Next slide, please, Rich. Now, we have the third core element that you probably noticed, which was new business models and traditional retail food safety. But on the new business models, reality is retail is changing and the food system is changing. I'm going to focus on retail because I'm talking to CFP. I told you about new foods being achieved, whether it's cell culture, gene edited, but in the retail sector, we're seeing a level of change that I hadn't seen. I was in retail for 10 years, and the changes that we've seen in the past 2 years are really impressive. The reality is the way consumers get their food is changing from around the corner to around the world, and with an ever increasingly changing last mile. And so we've said that we want to work with state partners. Many of you seeing this before we do. The industry is changing, faster than the regulations can. And we want to work with you to identify all the different ways consumers are now gaining access to food. We know there's grocery pickup. We know that there's home delivery. We've seen novel delivery vehicles, burritos delivered by air, and we know foods are being shipped to the consumer's front door. And so we have called the e-commerce business summit. We put out a reserve the date. It's going to be in October. I think other speakers are going to talk to you about this, but we hope that you can attend. The reality is, working together, we need to identify what's really happening in the marketplace, what's the appropriate standard of care that's needed to further protect consumers, and then what's the appropriate regulatory oversight that's required. Some of these oftentimes feeling like they don't fit into the traditional FSMA or model food code models. And I know CFP, you've been at the leading edge of this with some of the work groups and committees that you formed. You can go to the next slide, Rick. And then I've stated, we want to take a fresh look at traditional retail food safety. I'm grateful for what CFP has done over the years on retail food safety, but there's more work to be done. You heard me start at the beginning by stating we're serious about bending the curve of foodborne illness. You know, pause to think about it. The incidence of foodborne disease hasn't changed much in about 2 decades, right? We all see CDC reports, and I don't know about you, that leaves me totally unfulfilled. And I've often stated that we will bend the curve of foodborne illness, and we can. Now, I know some will say, Frank, it's been challenging because our ability to detect foodborne illness has gotten so good, with tools such as whole genome sequencing. That's true. But just like the public health infrastructure has innovated and done things differently, at first with pulse field, gel electrophoresis, and now with WGS, we too, on the prevention side of the equation, can accelerate what we're doing. I've always said that food safety is this race between our ability to detect and our ability to prevent. We want to further prevent foodborne illnesses, and we can't use better detection as a crutch indefinitely. And one of the ways we're going to do this, you know, is doing a whole lot of work around the supply chain, certainly focusing in on produce because of attribution studies saying produce is a large contributor to foodborne illness. But CDC data continues to tell us that retail food safety is still important, and too many illnesses and outbreaks are occurring at retail. Now, granted, they're not the types of outbreaks that make the headlines like the multi-state outbreaks that get traced back early in the food production system, but collectively they contribute to the overall burden of foodborne disease. And so some of the work that we want to do is advance the work that we're doing with you and the states on retail food safety. You know that we've issued retail food safety collaborative agreements to the tunes of lots of dollars. It's involved collaboration with the Associated Food and Drug Officials, NEHA, National Association of County and City and Health Officials, CDC, and CFP, always at the table. We've awarded $1.25 million to this collaborative work. And this is some of the things we want to do. We want to ensure that there's full adoption of the FAA food code across the nation. We want to further refine risk-based approaches, as I mentioned earlier. I think we can come up with better intervention strategies. The reality is that when you look at the FDA surveys done year after year on out-of-compliance risk factors, those out-of-compliance rates haven't changed much. So what are the new intervention strategies that we need? We can certainly strengthen how we respond to outbreaks. And we certainly want to engage in a conversation about what's the role of food safety management systems at retail. And if you can go to the next slide, Rich, as I start to round up here. The fourth core element in our New Era Blueprint is this issue of food safety culture. And when you talk about leadership and collaboration, you know, this one's pretty important. And it's this idea or notion that, you know, at the end of the day, I like to say, if I had to define food safety, I wouldn't define it with some fancy codex or regulatory definition. I would just say food safety equals behavior. And, you know, what we write on a piece of paper, what we write in a code or a company food policy is important, but what's more important is what people do. And the way you influence human behavior is different than the skill sets we have historically used on food science. And so I've often said that, you know, to advance food safety, we need to do a better job of blending food science with behavioral science concepts and concepts of organizational culture. And the first thing we're going to do is we're already working with an outside group to clearly go through describing what is a food safety culture, what is it not, trying to understand real principles of human behavior. It is a behavioral science, just like food science is. The field has exploded over the past couple of decades. And we'll begin by training and educating FDA staff, regulators on these principles so that we can be more effective in how we get others to say yes to food safety. Our hope is that maybe we can expand this type of training and education to regulatory officials at the state and local level across the country. But this work is in earnest and seriously underway. Last slide, Rich, I'd just like to close with this idea. You know, the work that CFP is doing is really amazing. As I look back now over the course of my career, I think the model that CFP has set by industry, working with regulatory and consumer groups and academics is really one of the most amazing models I've seen all over the world. And I've done food safety work almost on every continent. It democratizes food safety, and that's pretty impressive. And I want to thank you for that. As we think about the future, I know we've just come out of this pandemic, but I believe that we're going to be stronger and more resilient than ever. And we're going to need your help to create what we call a new era of smarter food safety, where we create a more digital, traceable, and safer food system so that consumers nationwide and even around the world can live better. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Frank, for your incredible leadership with the Food and Drug Administration, and also thank you for being a pioneer in retail food safety through your other opportunities with Walmart and also with Walt Disney. We'll now transition to the next speaker, and give me just a minute to do that. Okay, hopefully everybody is seeing a full slide on their screen. Our next speaker is Chef Keith Norman. And Keith Norman is a food safety manager and assistant executive chef at the South Point Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada. Chef Norman has a passion for food safety and sanitation that shines in his role as chef and as an instructor. He has worked his way up the culinary ladder at Las Vegas properties to include Bally's, the Mirage, Treasure Island, Paris, Suncoast, and South Point hotels and casinos. He is a certified professional food manager, certified HACCP manager, NEHA certified food trainer, Nevada Restaurant Association certified food safety trainer, a certified registered OSHA trainer, and master certified food executive. With that, we welcome Chef Norman to the podium.
Well, good morning. Thanks again for the opportunity, Dr. McSwain, Dr. Linton.
Chef, you're on mute.
Am I there now?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, cool. Did you miss everything I just said?
Go ahead and say that again.
Okay, no, I appreciate the opportunity just to share some thoughts. Dr. McSwain, Dr. Linton, and some of my partners from the Southern Nevada Health District that helped me to get here today. But next slide, please. So I always want to give honor to two of my mentors, Senator Smith and Dr. Snyder, who Senator Smith was a champion for allergens and really pushed a lot of the initiatives that we have here in Nevada. And I met Dr. Snyder in 2000, and just some of the leadership and guidance that he's given me over the years. I've always kept in touch with him. I was always able to bounce things off of him, and which was really, really, really good. So in my 33 years here in Nevada, from the different properties that I've worked at, I've seen a lot of changes within the food industry. And I think with COVID, a lot more has changed. Next slide, please. So again, the topics that we were talking about, collaboration. So just from a local level for me, because a lot of the chefs here in town, we don't really deal with FDA, but just from a local point of view, I think collaboration is really key. And I think a lot of chefs, I'm gonna kind of talk from a chef's perspective. I think a lot of chefs take for granted some of the food safety tasks that we have in the kitchen, and not really understanding that that I believe kitchen is ground zero for foodborne outbreaks and allergen incidents. So it's our responsibility working with our local health department to solve problems. And when you talk about collaboration, it is helping and learning from each other. Next slide, please. So when you think about, when I do training here in town, I always like to show the uglies. So when you see these two ladies, my partner mentioned the 2006 spinach outbreak. So my friend Riley, who was a victim of the 2006 spinach outbreak, and I've come to know her over the last 12 years, beautiful young lady. And then my friend Kendall, who has lived allergies from a very young age. She's been resuscitated 9 times in her young life. And I love to put those things in front of chefs, because I think sometimes we don't see, those invisible injuries. Both of these young ladies, have injuries that they'll have to live with for the rest of their lives. Next slide, please. So I think when we talk about collaboration or changing the culture, I have a very good relationship with my health department. And I think that's key. I think a lot of chefs, unfortunately, see the health department as an enemy and not as an adversary. But over my time here, I've had some excellent inspectors, and we don't always see eye to eye. But that's where I think attitude comes in. Code is code, and I think one of the things that we as chefs and those of us in the hospitality industry have to do better is really understanding the code. So forums like this, I know our health department, they have meetings, they have classes, which if all the chefs, took the time to go, I think that relationship, because we all have the common goal, right, to keep customers safe. So I think if chefs were more involved with, for me, our local health department, I think, when you talk about collaboration and partnership and leadership, I think all that ties in. Next slide, please. So again, I don't believe, I think more so now you see these things in the news or in papers. And I just don't believe, again, with the training that I do around town, that a lot of chefs and those of us in the hospitality industry really understand. I mean, I think we all care, but I just don't think we really understand the cost. Next slide, please. So leadership. So I believe this wholeheartedly. I think when you think about the health department and the kitchen and things we do, I think sometimes, it is challenging in the kitchen, but I think if we, take time to look at, like, for instance, hand washing, one of the simplest things in the world, but that chef or that manager understanding really truly, and especially now in the age of COVID, the importance behind, washing hands or taking temperatures, and some of the things that we know can cause injury. But I believe this, when you think about regulation awareness, I think that's where leadership, for me as a chef, and some of my counterparts that are chefs, I think really understanding, regulations. So when my health inspector comes in, we're on common ground. I understand she has a job and I have a job. So I think if chefs really, when you think about leadership, really took regulation awareness a little bit more serious, I think we'd have better footing. Next slide, please. So again, I believe this wholeheartedly. Starting with number 2, I think attitude is key. I again have a great relationship with my health department. I've had in the time I've been here, some really good health inspectors. But education, I think if we as chefs, I know Serve Safe was mentioned before, and that's all of my chefs and managers here are Serve Safe certified. The only problem I think sometimes is Serve Safe is a 5-year, course. You take it, and then 5 years later, you take it again for recertification. So I think there has to be a bridge in between that, and that's something that I try to do here. So 2020 was a tough year, but every year I pull all my managers and chefs off the floor, and we go over health department guidelines, and we do a Serve Safe refresher. So I think when you think education, when I say education is key, I think it has to be, continuous, not just, again, using Serve Safe as an example. It's every 5 years. So I think we have to be better, from that leadership role, because if I don't know, how can I teach someone below me? And again, I think attitude so key. And if I have, we've talked about creating the culture, which I've tried to do here, create that food safety culture where my workers and chefs understand why I do, certain things and why guidelines are put in place. So I think if I educate and I have the right attitude, then my team does. And then commitment. I always like to say, do the right thing when no one's looking. When I first started here at the South Point, when my inspector would come in, I started here in 2007. The first person that saw the health inspector would call PBX, and you have that 411 out there, and everybody's scurrying around to get things in order. So my attitude was we should already be ready. So I've worked hard to try to change that culture here. And then commitment again, do the right thing when no one's looking. Next slide, please. So participation, from a chef's point, do something positive. And I think for me here, training is one of the most positive things we do here, because then I instill in my workers, that we care. Attending forums like today's forum. I know here in town, our health department, they do a lot of, things with the community. So we have to get more involved. Being decisive, we have an inspection, we get guidelines, if there's violations. And I think chefs just need, instead of looking at it like, the health inspector is picking on them, take that that guideline that they've just given you in that inspection report and be decisive in actions, meaning you've put something in place to eliminate that from happening again. And I love inspect what you inspect. And I say that all the time here with the chefs. You can't expect one of the workers to do what you're not inspecting. Creating the environment for change to happen. And again, I'm very positive and passionate about food safety. The two ladies that I showed you, I tell you, when you hear their heartbreaking stories, that's one of the things that motivates me to do what I do. And then here again, consistent training. I think that's so key. Next slide, please. So just rounding out, I think there's a never-ending supply of things that we can learn every day here, and especially with COVID, we've learned here to do more with less. The one thing when I say in our meetings here, food safety hasn't changed. COVID just gave us a roadblock that we had to manage and maneuver around. Leaders that create an environment for learning can change the culture. When I was an instructor, I used to always tell my students, I don't give grades, I create the environment for you to learn. And that's what I've tried to do here. When I go out and I do training, I always talk about creating an environment for learning or creating that culture. And I think it starts with, attitude, commitment, and then knowledge. Chefs and managers need to really stay on the cutting edge of food safety and procedures. Leaders that teach, and I really believe this, that my responsibility here is to make sure all the chefs and managers have the knowledge to be able to manage the team and the things that the health department looks for when they come in. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other ways that we can injure or hurt someone. So just keeping managers here connected and keeping them in the game. And I think that also helps. Leaders that are committed and consistent build trust. And I say that even when our health inspector does come in the building, I try to teach the managers and chefs to be able, coach them up, train them up so they're able to have a conversation with the health inspector. I walk with my health inspector when she comes, and I often have spirited conversations with, managers. And one thing that I always say, I think almost every casino here in town has someone like me, a food safety manager. So when I have those snooty chefs who talk about code and health inspectors, I always say, it's disappointing to have someone like me babysit you, when I believe, my responsibility as a chef is to be versed in the code and the different procedures that, I'm responsible for to be able to keep customers safe. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to share some information with everyone and all of those who invited me. I thank you. And with that, I say goodbye.
Well, thank you, Chef, for taking time out of what I know is a very, very busy day to be able to share very practical and very hands-on information with our audience. It's now time to us to shift to the respondents. And we'll start first with Jeff Lawrence. Give me just a minute to open up a presentation. Jeff Lawrence is the Division Director for the Division of Environmental Health and Sustainability for the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. The division has 70 employees with an annual budget of $21.5 million. This division supports programs aimed at protect and improve Colorado's environmental and human health. Jeff has been with the department for over 29 years and has degrees in microbiology and environmental health from Colorado State University. Welcome, Jeff. Glad that you're a part of our program this morning.
Thanks, Richard. Appreciate it. Thanks for allowing me to be here. I think my invitation as a speaker was more contingent on you guys all being here present in Colorado, and I wish that was the case for us to have celebrated the 50 years of the CFP from the late 70s with the initial meeting here to the 2020 or 2021 meeting. I'm really impressed though with the way David, Richard, and Dr. McSwain have been able to pull this off virtually. I think it's going to be an amazing tribute to the meeting itself. I also think it's pretty interesting the title of the collaboration, leadership, and partnership that they asked us to talk about. That within that presentation, the mindfulness that they had to bring, federal, state, industry, and an NGO or an advocacy organization to talk about this because it takes us all. And there's a lot of different ways to look at this, different words. Go to the next slide, Richard. It's really, about building trust. And as Frank pointed out in his kind of word map or word cloud, he said there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but it really relies on the people. And the way we look at it is you have to build trust. It's an imperative. You saw that also in Chef Norman's Lego slide with all the different rules and roles that they talked about. Trust, be transparent. Within our strategic plan, we really, in our division, developed what we call a business plan. And it was an imperative to us to cultivate high quality relationships. And that's across industries, academia, and with our regulatory partners. If we don't have those relationships, we're not going to be successful in what we're trying to do. And I think you really heard Frank and Chef Norman really bring that to bear. It's also to recognize, unfortunately, the importance of our role, but also the limitations of our role. I'm sure Chef Norman and others with the industry may be like, oh, Jeff, you have no idea when you say this, but the number of hours that they're open, probably at least 12 a day throughout every day of the year. Those are the opening hours, not the preparation hours. If we as regulators are in their facility 1.5 hours, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, we're on their site less than 1/10 of 1% of the time that they're open. The only way we're going to have impact is to be able to make sure we have trusting, transparent relationships and that we're partnering with them in an engaged way, that we're listening to them. Because when we leave there, the other 4,200 hours that they're open each year, we're not there. So we need to make an impact on them and make sure that they understand the importance of their role. And I really respected Chef Norman's honesty in his presentation that not all chefs or all industries recognize the cost of foodborne illness. And it's that level of honesty and that sort of interaction that we have a real opportunity to impact. I also think it's imperative, and you heard this brought out by both keynotes, to embrace innovation and think outside of a regular think tank. CFP, as I say, here's a great example of that. We bring across people from different sides of the industry to look at issues and make sure that we bring issues forward in a collective way. And we not only bring the issues forward, but we bring implementation strategies forward. Again, and I think both said it, but Frank said it well, is we typically lag behind as regulators. Industry has to innovate to continue to expand and to be successful. You see that now, whether it be in their response to COVID or in the novel delivery systems, Uber Eats, home shopping, the global food market as a whole, we see their level of innovation and we need to make sure we keep up and keep pace with that. I also think it's really important for us to champion accountability, and that's both for us as the regulators within the industry or regulators of the industry and the industry themselves. And you heard Frank say this, he believes, I wrote it down, it starts and ends with better data. And we need to make sure that we have robust data systems and leverage that data to drive our decision-making and advocate for needs or changes to the system or our resources to support the system. And as it was pointed out, we need to make sure our regulations are current. They may always have a point of lag to them. That's just somewhat of the nature of the beast. But the food traceability rule that Frank mentioned is a good example of that. What the work is going to be done here over the next week at the CFP is going to lead us into a new updated food code. And we as states and local agencies have the responsibility to look at that and incorporate those strategies into the work we do. Next slide, Richard. We also need to implement approaches, to minimize our known constraints. Again, I keep going to Frank, as a lot of you do, because his words resonate with me and they're wise. But in his book, he talks about if we've been doing something the same way for 15 or 20 years, there's a pretty good sign that we've probably been doing it wrong. We recognized that in Colorado. We recognized that we were having a very static line on cold hold violations and other risk factor violations, and that we weren't having the impact we needed on those. We didn't want to define a 30% or greater violation rate of success. That actually really comes close to defining failure in our view. And so we wanted to look at new approaches. We worked with industry in a very open, transparent way. They championed legislation for us to have a more robust enforcement system that really worked on strategies that other states had moved forward on the prevalence of violations. So it's not just singularly, it's cold hold, but staff across the state will mark it as either a high prevalent violation or low prevalent violation. We then will focus our resources on following up on those that had a score of high risk prevalent violations. We all know that our resources are constrained, and while FDA has done a good job of mapping out those voluntary national standards, there's not many agencies, and probably post-COVID there will be less that meet standard 8. So how do we approach those constraints and do it in an appropriate manner? Have honest interactions with industry. As I told you, we discovered a problem. We used our data, as talked about before, to identify the issue and the needs. We went to industry and said, how can we do this in a better way? That represents the collaboration and partnership that is an imperative to moving the system forward. And we got a new an enforcement legislation. Our goal isn't enforcement. Our goal is, as Chef Norman pointed out, is education and to have an educative approach. But when we do get to that point, we need to make sure we resolve the issues and resolve them expediently. And also don't reinvent the wheel. As I said, a lot of the strategies we did, we begged, borrowed, and stealed from other states, locals, and thought partners on how to move our system forward. And we also, like we said, didn't want to hold on to the approaches that weren't working. And then also learn from our collective mistakes. Thomas Edison has said he's never failed. He's just found out about 10,000 ways it won't work. I'm well on my path to those 10,000, but we need to move forward and figure out new ways to do things in an innovative manner. Again, industry will always lead that way in innovation. We just need to make sure we keep pace with them and also make sure we do it in a mindful way that food safety is our true north for industry and ourselves, and we make sure that becomes our gold star. And as you all are today, I think I have 404 participants on the chat. Be active in your various organizations, whether it's the CFP, the affiliates for the Association of Food and Drug Officials, affiliates for National Environmental Health Association, or whomever. Maintaining those relationships. As Frank and Chef Norman were talking, I was scrolling through the participants, see a lot of names on there that I know I can reach out to. Might not have reached out to them for years, but I know I can, and I can reach out, phone a friend, and I also want to make sure that I'm a resource to them as well. And so what I hope is some of the practices we put in place here, our directed advocate within your organization is Troy Huffman. And Troy is an impassioned leader on our food safety endeavors here in Colorado, and he can always be a resource to you and your staff. Next slide. And with that, because I wish you could all have been here, I did the obligatory Chamber of Commerce photo of Colorado, wishing you could all have visited this and seen this in person. But I thank you for your time. I hope you have an amazing conference and enjoy the rest of your week.
Jeff, thank you for a great presentation, and thanks also for the wonderful picture at the end. I think all of us in our minds are in some way in Colorado, and we're hoping to be able to find our place there at some point real soon. Hopefully the invitation still exists in a couple of years.
It's extended, Richard. We'd be happy to host. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Great job. All right, let me go ahead and stop sharing. Our last speaker, our last respondent of the day is Ann Delhanick, joins us from West Lynn, Oregon, and she's representing Stop Foodborne Illness, a consumer industry initiative to influence human behaviors and improve internal food safety culture. And I had the pleasure of talking with Ann about a week and a half or so ago, and I think she's going to bring a really personal, at-home touch to her remarks as well, experiencing a lot related to food safety issues and challenges. So good morning, Ann, and welcome. We're glad that you're here.
Good morning. Thank you, Rich, for that introduction. And thank you, Frank and Chef Norman, for your powerful presentations. This is my first biennial conference, and it is an honor to be here. As Rich mentioned, I am a foodborne illness survivor. In 2003, I contracted E. coli 0157H7 and HUS that affected 4 of my major organs: my brain, heart, pancreas, and kidneys. So by all accounts, I shouldn't be here, but here we are. My mom actually discovered STOP after reading Mary Hersing's book about her son's experience with E. coli, as it was the only book in the library that wasn't a medical journal at the time. I have been a constituent of STOP ever since, and most recently worked on the creation of their Alliance program, partnering with those impacted by foodborne illness with companies within the food industry. I have also worked in food manufacturing for the past 11 years as my day job. And when I started in food manufacturing, I was a frontline worker processing multiple tons of product a day. I can understand how easy it can be to become complacent or kind of function on autopilot in such a fast-paced environment. I also appreciated Chef Norman's point of also sometimes being a lack of understanding of why there are certain processes and protocols in place, and how utilizing new tools and consistent training that connects each individual role can make a powerful impact on daily operations. And to Frank's point, there really is a food revolution. I see it every day, and now more than ever, consumers are interested in where their food comes from and how they can feel confident in its safety. Consumers are also more interested in the entire supply chain and understanding how it works. My own experience with E. coli completely changed the way myself and my family thought about food and how we prepared it, how we purchased it, the places that we chose to eat at. I can tell you we ate burnt meat for years for the fear of undercooking it. And as retail is changing so quickly, as Frank also mentioned, faster than the regulations can keep up with it, education is another piece that will continue to need to be essential for consumers to understand the risks and the importance of food safety practices. Speaking as someone who has never found out the source of my illness, creating better tools and processes to more efficiently trace the origin of contact would be profoundly helpful. It may be reactive in the sense that it is after the fact of contagion, but it is essential to gain knowledge and prevent the cases from spreading, as well as be instrumental in preventing the same situations from happening over and over again. What I am most encouraged and excited by is the idea of not only building and investing in food safety culture, but to be able to quantify it. Building a culture of shared thoughts and behaviors starts with individuals. And one of the most impactful ways that I've seen shifts in cultures is through the sharing and understanding of the impact of the lack of food safety, whether it's a nationwide outbreak, or in my case, the only case in an entire county. Foodborne illness starts with individual actions. And stories are powerful and have the ability to impact not only those individuals, but group thoughts and behaviors. And I really appreciated Frank's point that there is a difference between food safety management and food safety leadership. And food safety leaders providing platforms and opportunities to share for those impacted by foodborne illnesses will be essential in building these programs. And as well, to Chef Norman's point about statistics, our stories, our names, our faces make the intangible more tangible and turn theoretical into reality. The progress that I've seen since my experience in 2003 is really astounding, but there is still so much to learn and areas to improve in this continued fight for food safety, which is exactly why we are all here today. In closing, I do want to thank everyone here, the tireless work that you all do on a daily basis to protect public health and safety is really inspiring. And I'm really excited to work together with you this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Fantastic job of bringing all the collective thoughts together of the speakers this morning and your own personal viewpoint as well. Again, we've got about 10 minutes or so that we can open this up for questions. I know that the chat function is now actively working. If you'd like to go ahead and put a question in, and to get things stimulated or started, I just wrote down some things that I heard collectively across the four speakers. And if I can get the four speakers to kind of put themselves live on the Zoom as well. All the speakers said establish relationships and build trust. That's the cornerstone in being able to move forward and be successful. Frank made a great point of collaboration is not enough. And there's a big difference between collaboration and partnerships, and going together to win it. And I think that's a really great viewpoint, way to think about food safety control. Use the data. Everybody said the importance of utilizing the data. From someone who has a personal viewpoint and would like to know exactly the cause. And Frank would also like to know efforts that can be made to be able to reduce challenges associated with foodborne illness. Embrace new technologies. Be adaptive and accepting of new ways of thinking and new ways of change. I think the chef did a great job of talking about the importance of ongoing teaching. Teach to change food safety practices. Education, not regulation, saves lives. And I think maybe most importantly, the impact here is the consumer. And all of us are equally involved and engaged in this effort towards control and prevention of foodborne illness. So I'm still looking for questions to see if there are questions out there. I'll give this a minute or so. Maybe people are a little bit shy this morning. All right, chat is still not open. So I would ask my support team if you can figure out why the chat is not open. Give these guys a minute to figure this out.
Richard, Jeff Lawrence here. So I think it might be important to note, I heard Chef close in his that he thinks every casino in Vegas has one of him there. I'm pretty sure that's not the case, Chef. Based on your credentials and your commitment, I'm pretty sure you're unique in that, and you should be proud of your accomplishments and what you stand for. Is an impressive credentialing for sure.
So I see the chat function is working. I'm getting a lot of comments back, just know. All right, here we go. Our first question. For Chef, can you highlight some of the tools you've developed to educate and support your team's allergen awareness and preparedness?
Sure. And Jeff, thank you so much. Here, SOPs, I know you all know. So using HACCP as my guideline here, going through those steps, from the time that a customer says allergen to the time we serve that meal, we've put those SOPs and those steps in place. And I think for anyone, that's really the key. You know, you look at, you know, a restaurant customer says allergen, and, you know, so communication is key. So we have a allergen pad that we've put in place with the top 9 allergens. Plus, you know, we get garlic and oils and different things, and that's on the pad as well. And then, you know, again, training. I mean, all of our workers here are certified in allergen awareness, and we do that continuously every year to make sure we stay, you know, we stay in line. And then the kitchen has its responsibilities, and we use, San Jamar came out with an allergen kit that gives me a dedicated board and utensils, and we use that. So I would say, you know, just, you know, you lay out a plan. I mean, again, HACCP, you can't go wrong with that. And I use that as my base for, you know, for doing pretty much all of my SOPs.
Thank you, Chef. We've got a question here coming from Ben Chapman from NC State University. And this is for Frank or Chef Norman, or Chef Norman. If you had to predict what emerging societal issues do you anticipate impacting our food safety challenges 5 years from now, what would they be? Climate change? Labor shortages? What do you think will be the societal changes of the future that will have a big difference relative to food safety opportunities and challenge? So Frank, why don't I go ahead and push this to you first?
Thanks, Ben. Always reliable for asking a tough question. But listen, there's so many. I would say one is really, I think the COVID pandemic has illustrated that we have a very interdependent food system. And while when you think about today's food system, it's evolved to provide tens of thousands of SKUs. Your typical grocery store has about 50,000 to 75,000 SKUs in a grocery store. That's amazing. You walk into them. You can imagine if you were to fast forward in time from the 16th century, you would think we're all living like kings and queens. Lots of different foods, just-in-time inventory, and it's evolved this way, and it's pretty efficient. But we've realized, I think, because of the pandemic, then because of cyber attacks, I think we'll see with climate change, is that this system is pretty fragile. Just like small enhancements really allow us to achieve very strong benefits from tweaking the supply chain, small disruptions really affect it with outages and disruptions. And so I think this concept of a resilient supply chain is going to become increasingly important over the next few years. And it wasn't just because of the pandemic, it's just where we're at. I do think climate change, we're seeing cases right now in the state of Washington that people think might be warming waters there will be an issue. And then I think on the positive frame is what you heard me talk a little bit about, then is this idea that we're going to have new tools that are going to be game changers for prevention. And so I'm not worried. I'm actually optimistic about the future of food safety. And I'm convinced that over this next decade, I actually bet on it, that we're going to see the curve of foodborne illness once and for all bend. You've seen it flat for 2 decades. We're on the verge of unprecedented changes because of the kind of conversations we're having here, which is we're not going to accept status quo. We're going to continue to push down on acceleration. So I think tools like artificial intelligence, machine learning, distributed ledger technology, genetic revolution, all of this is going to allow us to bend the curve of foodborne illness. Lots of change ahead of us. There's no question about it. So none of us should, rest on our laurels. If you're in this space, you ought to be committed to continual learning because there's a lot of change ahead.
Thank you, Frank. Chef, would you like to respond to?
Well, I don't think I can top that. The only thing I would say, just from staffing point of view, is what we found, or what I found here. We've pretty much brought back all of our employees that were furloughed, but unfortunately, with some of the shortages that we're having, and what I'm finding with some of the new hires that we have here, they're not at that level of food safety understanding that I'd like them to be. So I think that would be one of the challenges for chefs. But yeah, I can't. Frank is amazing. I can't touch that. But I would just say, for me, staffing is the new hires we've gotten here. They're I think code is pretty simple. Some of the things that we talk about, hand washing, that should be a basic universal thing. But again, that's the only thing I see coming out of 2020 is education.
So Ann, I'm going to push this question to you. What about the consumer's expectations? What are the consumer's expectations as we get better technology and better data and better interventions? How does that societal change make a difference, do you think?
I think the expectations are much higher, and they're going to continue to be higher. Just seeing, as I mentioned, kind of the whole supply chain, people are more interested instead of just, what's in the grocery store or what's on the menu and things like that. They're more interested in the entire supply chain. And so I think transparency is going to be key, and honesty, and there's going to be limitations, but showing up for consumers and presenting things that we do know and can provide. And in the restaurants and food service industries, I think that'll be huge as well. The people out in the world.
Thank you. Yep, Frank, a follow-up.
If I could just build on that, well, before I answer the question about just the consumer, I do want to just say, hey, I was so impressed with all the speakers, Chef Norman, Jeff, and thank you for your courage. I've sat through a lot of food safety events over the years, but I was fully engaged, and you guys did a fabulous job, just simply amazing. But I do think this issue of consumers, at the end of the day, I like to say you have close to 400 people participating. Doesn't matter whether you're at a local level, state level, whether you're in industry, academia, or nonprofit, we're all working for the same boss. And that's not just a phrase, it's the consumer. They're our bosses. And I do believe, Richard, that with new digital technologies, transparency, the way information is exchanged today, that the consumer is increasingly becoming the boss, and they're going to have expectations of us. We're seeing that. And, the scale is changing. It's not about regulation so much. It's about a social license to do what we do, how we do it, and what they expect of the work that we do. And so I overall see this level of transparency and consumer engagement as a good thing. And I think it's going to drive a lot of changes. I've seen it from personal experience operating establishments in many countries around the world, 14,000 retail establishments. In countries where you didn't have good public health infrastructure for detecting foodborne illnesses, in countries where you didn't have strong regulations, consumer transparency was the game changer, was the lever you pulled to make changes. And so this level of transparency is going to result in a lot of positive change and quite frankly, some disintermediation in the food system.
Thank you, Ann and Frank. Our next question is open for all participants, for all speakers, but I think I'm going to start with Jeff to try to answer this question first. Per the explosion in delivery, what does the panel believe the most critical food safety issues are related to the same, and how do we get to a consistent standard across the country?
I think the easiest response for me is I defer my time to Frank, see what he would come up with. But I don't know, it's one of those things. I would actually lean a lot to industry to see what solutions they might provide and move forward. In the delivery mindset, whether you're looking at Uber Eats or something like that, I frankly don't have as high a level of concern about those and those, pick and go and drop, because the meal was ordered for the individual within the moment. Typically, it's not going to sit there in car or at home for a period of time. It's the more the meal prep ones and how those get delivered. I candidly have done some of my own reconnaissance on that as a family and done some of those deliveries to see how they come to us. I personally see right now a phenomenal job with that. I think more than anything, it's to make sure those things don't exist in shadows and that they come out and they're transparent and we know of them and they know they have engagement and partnerships with us at state and local and federal levels to make sure they're doing it right. That's their intent. Let's make sure we partner together on it to make sure it's done that way.
Frank, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, let me take a stab, try to be succinct to allow some other answers and questions. But when I've thought about delivery, I've often thought about what I refer to quite simply TTC or TTT, 3 T's: TTTC. Time and temperature control. Jeff, to your point, the short order, time can be used in lieu of public health control. Hopefully document the time. Temperature, we got to maintain temperature. Third T for me is tamper resistant. We've seen how some are stepping up in the industry, and now at the beginning of the pandemic, they were delivering things with bags open, and now they're making sure that they put some type of seal. And then we've got to prevent cross contamination. And like you, Jeff, I think, for short-term deliveries, you order something, it's delivered to your home in about 15 minutes. That's not a problem. We know shipping of product across straight lines is a different issue, and we've seen some surveys that suggest, hey, there's potential there for cross-contamination, significant temperature abuse, not providing instructions or education to consumers. But I don't think it's something we should take lightly. I don't think we should just think, by and large, the industry is doing well. We haven't seen a big problem. Because the one thing I've learned over the years, Rich, is that when it comes to food safety, an entire industry wins or loses together. There's a peanut butter outbreak, all peanut butter sales suffer. And I'm just concerned that if we don't have a good actor or actress in the system, they're going to cast a negative light. And so I think it's appropriate for us to work together to, as I mentioned, define the standard of care and what's the appropriate controls, and to make sure that everyone does it the right way every day. But by and large, it looks like they're doing a pretty good job with how this is evolving so quickly.
Thank you, Frank. This is a question from Elizabeth Nutt. This is directed to you, Frank. Do you foresee that the traceability technology would be able to assist in the type of illness that Anne experienced? And I think I'm also going to take a couple of other questions. It talks about how do we get new data and how do we get new technologies acceptable? So can you talk about, could the traceability technology be used to be able to find a solution? And then how do we convince the industry, and how do we convince our other stakeholders, whether it be federal, state, or local, to buy in on this?
Yeah, well, Elizabeth, thanks for the question. It's good to hear from you. I remember sitting across the table for you, a lot of CFPs. But listen, I'm a big believer in creating a more transparent food system, and appreciate your courage. What I heard you say is, in a lot of these outbreaks, we really don't know what caused the illnesses. And the analogy I like to use is we're getting so good at finding the needles in the haystack with whole genome sequencing. It's a little bit crazy if you pause to think about it. We can find the needles, but we can't find the haystacks. We can't find the haystacks. What food manufacturer, what food did this come out of? And so just like we can find the needles, we need to apply that level of innovation and technology to find the haystacks. We're going to remove those needles and haystacks from the marketplace quickly. Now, granted, there will be some illnesses, we'll shorten those epidemic curves, but as Anne stated, we'll be able to do root cause analysis, really figure out what are the contributing factors and prevent future outbreaks and illnesses. We've seen this pattern of reoccurring outbreaks with certain food vehicles. Longer term, I think this level of traceability transparency is the analogy I use. It's the equivalent of shining a light on all of these different nodes in the food system. When you have this level of transparency, guess what happens? That reduces anonymity. Right now, we don't really know where the food is produced. We don't know what kind of conditions or practices. And when you light this up this way, people are going to self-govern their behavior. So I'm convinced longer term, it's a game changer for prevention. I also believe that it's going to revolutionize the way health departments, both federally and locally, do tracebacks. We're starting to do some proof of concepts internally at FDA, where we're receiving traceability data, not on these invoices and packing slips, but in digital form. And instead of drawing back your traditional traceback diagram, which takes a long time, you let the computer do the work for you. You capture the data electronically. It starts drawing the connections with statistical probability of which traceback leg is most likely in common with most of the illnesses. So, like I said, there's a lot of change coming. I think it's going to be exciting.
So we've got time for about one more question, and we've got 5 or 6 questions that are related to food safety education and culture and changing behavior. So I'd like each of the 4 respondents to respond back on what have you found to be effective from an educational standpoint to change behavior, and what are we not doing that you think we need to overcome? So what's working and what's not working? I'll go ahead and start with the chef first, who I know does this every single day. What's working and what needs to be done?
Well, I think what's working For me, when I do training and I use stories like Ann's, I think you got to touch the heart. I think we take for granted sometimes, you know, when you don't have that face in front of you, you just hear a story. And, you know, one of the things I use in training, this is the old story, but, you know, there was a motorcycle accident here in Vegas, and all it said was motorcycle came off of, you know, the Charleston exit and was run off the road. The motorcycle driver hit the guardrail and was killed. But you didn't, you know, it's just a story. Then later in the day, they had the picture of the motorcycle rider. So that was just real impactful for me. And when I do training here, I always put the ugly stories up, you know, to try to touch the heart. What's not working? Not really sure. I think we have a long road ahead of us. I think for all of us, you know, changing, I guess, the attitude, the way we look at, you know, guests, and, you know, just being, you know, I always throw education in there because, you know, education I think is key. So one of the things I would say is, you know, for chefs, you know, are there links, you know, when you talk about the changes in the food supply and the flow of food, you know, I think those are things that might help us. So if there's links that, you know, you can put out, I mean, I'm on a couple of, you know, links that come to me automatically, but I think that would be key for, like, things not working. Educate us on my level, you know, and sometimes, you know, asking me to search for information, I'm not going to do it. But if that's coming to my inbox, you know, on a daily basis, I think that's a plus.
Anne, what is your perspective? What needs to happen?
I think there's a lot that is changing and growing in really positive ways. I think consistency is key, getting more consistency across the board and in training. I think also in making personal connections in these trainings, not necessarily focusing on the event of someone getting sick, but also opening it up to, you know, the long-term effects that people don't necessarily see, but that, you know, years down the road, people who've experienced foodborne illness are still dealing with. And so opening that conversation up a little bit more, I think would be impactful as well, so that in training, you're not just like, oh yeah, this terrible thing happened to this person, and that's why, but also understanding the long-term effects of that for people, I think will make it go further.
Thank you, Anne. Jeff, your thoughts?
Yeah, to build a little on what they both said, I think from the regulatory perspective, it's what we all said previously, educate versus regulate. And that really is about who's doing the work. While a hard science degree is a great degree, Richard, educators are always good people to be out there helping and taking a really emotionally intelligent look at the interaction and the inspection. So it's an information exchange. It's not a monologue. It's not a dialogue to the chef or the staff, but it's an information exchange to gain knowledge. That goes back to everything we talked about in building trust and making sure that we have an effective relationship with the industry, and recognizing there is a shared goal here. Maybe there's a bottom line for industry. You know, they want a happy customer, and the happy customer goes to a bottom line. That happy customer didn't have Anne's experience, right? So it's a shared goal. It works, and just making sure that. But I think it's the people who's doing the work is probably the most important thing.
Thank you, Jeff. And I see Dave McSwain is on the screen, which means our time is close to being done, but I didn't want to leave this question without giving Frank just a second to be able to provide his thoughts as well.
I'll try to be quick, Richard. Hey, I'm just delighted that we're having these conversations about behavior change, not just knowledge. And so what I see is that the profession is at a different place. Food safety culture is no longer thought of as a slogan. Really, how do we leverage these concepts of behavior change? For me, it always begins with making food safety part of our values and beliefs. That's why we're doing it, not just because it's a company policy or regulation. You heard the mention of stories. I've always said, we always talk about 48 million. It's more powerful to talk about one. That's where people pay attention. The statistics, they get lost on that. And I also believe there's power in teaching not only the right way as food safety professionals, we want to tell them this is how you do it right. But if you teach them, if you do it the wrong way, what are the consequences? People tend to perk up and listen. And so, again, just an honor and privilege to be with you again. I'm very excited about what CFP is doing, is where you're headed based on today's conversation. You convinced me the future looks bright. Thank you, CFP.
Thank you, Frank, and to all of you, a wonderful job this morning. Thank you all for taking your time and doing in this alternative format. Let's everybody give them a silent round of applause. And with that, I will turn it over to the CFP Executive Director and my good friend, Dr. David McSwain.
Thanks, Rich. And I won't take but just a minute, but there are a couple of housekeeping details that I would like to share. I think this has been a perfect kickoff to the meeting, but it is just the beginning of the meeting and not the end. So hopefully everyone will plan to be actively involved in all of the sessions throughout this week. This afternoon starting at 12:45 Eastern time. And by the way, with the Pathable platform, all of the items in your personal calendar should reflect your local time zone, whatever that might be. But starting at 12:45 Eastern time, we will begin with the concurrent council sessions. And we hope that everyone will plan to participate. We've had a few people ask, is it possible to participate in more than one council session? The answer of that is, of course, yes. But you will have to log out of the one council session that you're currently in, go back to the Pathable homepage and click on another council session that you would like to attend. I'd also like to remind people that we will be using the Attendify mobile app throughout the week to update people on the status of various issues that are being vetted by the councils. And so this is a great way to kind of keep pace with the changes that are going on. There will be breaks throughout the afternoon in the council sessions. Not every council will meet and break at the same exact time, but they all will take biological breaks during the 4-hour session that is scheduled. Last but not least, today are the first meetings of our constituency caucus groups. These groups, as you know, are our regulators, our industry, our academic, and our consumer members, where you can talk about issues. Probably this afternoon, there'll be some meet and greet kinds of events for first-time attendees, as well as those who are veterans at attending CFP. So we hope that you will stick around and participate in those sessions as well. We hope you'll take the next few minutes to get either lunch or breakfast, depending on, again, what time zone you're in, but we'll look forward to seeing you back in about 45 minutes. Thanks, and have a great rest of your morning.
Thank you, David. Bye-bye.